This happened when I was in my mid-20s, right before COVID temporarily killed the concert scene, though I know for some it permanently killed it. I went to a concert that honestly should have just been a fun night out, but it ended up being a let's not meet again encounter with a creepo. The show was at a mid-sized venue in town, not a massive arena, but bigger than a hole-in-the-wall kind of place. It could house somewhere between a few hundred to a couple thousand people at most, though I'm going to be honest, I know jack about venue size or how many people can legally fit in a box. That night, it was definitely at capacity though. There were a lot of people and we were all getting to know each other pretty well, if you get what I mean. The band playing was one of my favorites. They were the opener for the headliner. Loud, energetic kind of music that you'll regret in the morning. That's the kind of show it was. I usually went to these concerts with friends, but that night no one else was free, so it was just me. This isn't a common thing. I really didn't like doing things like this alone, but I was really wanting to go, so I went. I made my way through the crowds, a handful of rows back from the stage, and I was there when they got on stage and started their first song. As soon as the first song ended, that's when it all started. At first it was subtle, just a bump from behind. He pressed against me just a bit too close. Normally this would be just a thing that unfortunately happens in a crowd, but it didn't feel accidental. It kind of felt intentional. Like he had pushed his body against mine on purpose. Again, it's something that does happen, creep's gonna creep. So I just took a deep breath, recomposed myself, and got into the second song that was now playing. Then, it happened again. Except this time there was a hand that touched my side. I jumped and gave a bit of a startled yelp. Definitely not something I expected. I quickly pulled away from his hand and turned around to see who the hell thought that was okay. And that's when my stomach dropped. This guy wasn't even watching the stage. He was just standing there and staring at me. He was tall, mid-30s I'd say, with a baseball cap and a hoodie pulled up. No band shirt, no excitement on his face, just an empty expression staring down at me. He almost looked like he was literally there to just creep on people, not for the show. And somehow that was so much worse than it just being some drunk dude being a bit handsy at random. I gave him a what the hell look, like raising my eyebrows and gesturing for him to move forward if that's what he was wanting to do, but he didn't pass me. He stayed glued to his spot, just staring at me like he didn't understand what I was trying to convey, and moving his head to watch me as I moved to the side. I tried to get back into the music, but as soon as I turned around to watch the band, I immediately felt him press against me again. This time closer and more, I guess, intimate, you could say. I could literally feel his breath on my neck, and that was just gross. At this point, I spun around and yelled, "Back the hell up!" I thought that he would get it, would say sorry, or would react in some way, shape, or form, but he just stared at me again with no expression. I was being rushed with adrenaline and was hitting a boiling point. I said screw it and shoved sideways through people, trying to find somewhere else to stand that was nowhere near him. I pushed off to the left side of the stage. I was on the right side initially, and found another spot a little further back. When I stopped, I paused to look around to see if he was there too, but I didn't see him, so I thought I was safe. Of course, I wasn't though. Within a couple of minutes, I felt another push against me, and when I turned around again, it was him. Same expressionless stare and silence. It's hard to explain how terrifying it is to be surrounded by hundreds of people and yet still feel completely singled out. I wanted to yell, but the music was drowning out everything. I wanted to get help, but I wasn't really sure who I could go to take care of this situation. Part of me was also worried that if I pushed away or tried to run, he may escalate. He clearly had no issue being seen. I had no problem with being noticed and yelled at or leered at or anything. So how far would he go? After staring at him for the duration of an entire song, it finally ended, and there was a small break in the energy. I bolted past him through the crowd, ignoring all the angry stares I was getting from people that didn't understand my predicament. About halfway to the back of the crowd, I looked back, and shocker, he was about 15 feet behind me, following in my direction. I think that was when it really hit me that this guy wasn't just being a creep. It wasn't a coincidence. He was completely and totally focused on me. For some reason, I had caught this guy's obsession for the night, and he wasn't going to let it go. Thankfully, while I was pushing to the back, I noticed that there were marked security guards for the venue near the bar. I flagged one of them down and shouted that there was a guy that kept touching me and was following me and that it was really starting to freak me out. Thankfully, the guard took me seriously, because when he looked up and noticed the guy, his face changed to a look of aggression, and he stepped forward, blocking the man from coming any closer. And, just like that guy's demeanor shifted. He went from that blank expression to a fake grin. He even laughed and shrugged at the guard, saying, "I was just having fun, man, chill out." The guard wasn't buying it. He told the man to back off and walked me toward the balcony area, which overlooked the stage. He told me that he'd be by the bar all night, in the same spot, and if that guy came anywhere near me, to tell him and he would take care of it. I thanked him and headed up the stairs to the balcony where I watched the rest of the show, though, to be honest, I really didn't feel like being there. I think I felt obligated though since I had paid for the ticket, so I had to see it through to the end. The headliner came on and finished up the show, and thankfully the guy didn't come up toward the balcony. I did see him again after the show ended, walking through the crowd as everyone filtered out, looking around like he was trying to find something. I'd wager money that that something he was trying to find was me. I actually sat up on the balcony for a while after the show ended, just to make sure that everyone did filter out and to make sure there was no way I was going to run into him again. The guard actually came up to see if I was still there, and he walked me to the front to make sure I didn't run into him, which I appreciated. At least, he genuinely seemed to care. I'll never know what that guy's deal was, other than he was just being a really pervy creep. He never said a single word to me. By the way he followed me and kept following me, I have to make assumptions that he had malicious intent, but he just didn't get the chance to do what he wanted. Like he was waiting for the right moment to, dare I say it, pounce. I haven't been to another concert since this happened for various reasons, though this was definitely one of the big ones. Any event that I do go to now, I refuse to go alone just in case. I know it was kind of an empty event, but I feel like this all could have gone much, much worse if he got the chance to corner me. He did teach me one major life lesson, though. Sometimes the scariest people aren't the loud, rambunctious ones making a scene. Sometimes they're the ones who stay completely silent. I think from time to time, everyone enjoys a good concert. I know that even I, an admitted shut-in, enjoy a good show from time to time. An exciting night out with friends, probably a few stiff drinks, and then a night of eardrum-blasting excitement full of your favorite songs, a light spectacle, and of course, the pyrotechnics. Who doesn't love a good pyro display? Well, actually, there are probably a few people who can't stand them anymore. And that's what our story today is about, pyro gone wrong. Though sadly, in the field of pyrotechnics, there are many examples of pyro gone wrong. One miscue, 1 second off in timing, being 1 inch out of position. Ask The Undertaker, Mark Calloway, or James Hetfield of Metallica. With pyrotechnics, there are so many things that can go wrong, and that's exactly why you can only use them in certain venues that are deemed safe, and with proper permits in place. That's what really makes the story that I'm about to share with you all so truly tragic. It was completely avoidable. So we go now to the night of the tragedy. West Warwick, Rhode Island, February 20th, 2003. At the station nightclub, people have gathered to come and watch a show headlined by an offshoot band of Great White, called Jack Russell's Great White. With 462 people in the crowd, the club was already over capacity, with the official capacity of the club cited as 404. The foundation of the disaster are already coming together. During the band's opening song, Desert Moon, the tour's manager, Daniel Bichelle, set off 4 pyrotechnics in the form of 4 gerbs. 2 of the gerbs in the center were facing straight up, with 2 flanking them at 45-degree angles. What the gerbs do are produce a controlled spray of sparks 15 feet for 15 seconds. Within seconds of the pyros going off, the acoustic foam caught fire and rapidly began to burn. The foam was on both sides, and top center above the drummer's alcove. Initially, it was assumed the fire was part of the act, and it wasn't until the fire reached the ceiling and the unventilated smoke began to get overwhelming that people began to realize otherwise. The band played for a full 20 seconds after the pyro had finished. When they stopped playing, the crowd began to back away from the stage, and the band's lead singer, Jack Russell, very calmly said, "Wow, that's not good." Within 40 seconds of the fire igniting, the band was off the stage as the club's fire alarm sounded, for what little good it did, as it was not connected to any local fire departments. The club also had no sprinkler system installed, so within a minute the fire was spreading and smoke filled the club. The fire was raging and there was nothing to slow it down. Within 6 minutes of the initial blaze starting, the entire club was engulfed. And at this point, we have to talk about something very grave, I'm afraid. Some of you may know or remember that there is actual footage of the fire that was recorded by one of the concertgoers that night. While I am certain that it probably still exists somewhere, I very respectfully ask that you not seek it out. Moving past all that, let's look into all the things that went wrong before the night of the calamity. It's a bumpy road, even getting to the night of the fire, as the club already had a history of issues and citations. The building itself was built in the late 1940s, and had many occupants during its lifespan. In 1972, one such occupant was a restaurant called Julio's, who had a fire of their own during the time in the building. While there was no one in the building at the time, the interior of the building suffered significant damage. In 1991, the building was opened as a nightclub, which was purchased by brothers Michael and Jeffrey Dreyer in 2000. In the months preceding the fire, they had been cited for 9 minor code violations. Yet, in both the November and follow-up inspection in December of 2002, the Warwick Fire Marshal, Dennis LaRoque, did not cite the polyurethane the club used for soundproofing, which was against code, because the foam is highly flammable. Later on, LaRoque would claim that he did not spot the foam during the November inspection because he had been upset over an illegal inward swinging door that he had previously asked to be removed. So, come the night of the concert in February of 2003, we have a perfect storm brewing. An overcrowded club that is not up to fire safety standards to begin with, that is now packed beyond capacity. Now, to be fair, the nightclub had been hosting heavy metal bands and 80s tribute bands that had used pyrotechnics, and everything had been fine. But that's how these things go, isn't it? When you're skirting the rules, everything is always fine right up to the moment that it isn't. And we know what the end result was, don't we? Well, kind of. An inferno engulfed the club in a matter of minutes. The second it became clear the blaze wasn't part of the show, the band abandoned the stage, and now we have 462 people panicking, all trying to find the exits. People were trampled in the ensuing stampede. So many people were trying to crowd out exits at one time that they were becoming hopelessly stuck and entangled, unable to free themselves with an unstoppable tide of more panicking patrons desperately trying to escape the smoke and flames. By the time everything was over, of those 462 concertgoers, 100 of them had tragically lost their lives. 230 of them suffered non-fatal injuries. An absolute tragedy, catastrophe. Whatever word you want to apply to it, it's probably befitting. The investigation that followed saw multiple civil and criminal cases filed. The person that had ignited the pyro, tour manager Daniel Bichelle, pleaded guilty to 100 counts of unintentional manslaughter in 2006 and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, he was released in 2008 after several families of victims advocated for his parole. The club's owners pleaded no contest and avoided trial. Michael received the same sentence as Bichelle, but was released in 2009 while Jeffrey received 500 hours of community service. Other legal actions were taken against Great White as well as several other parties. As of 2008, all legal issues have been resolved, mostly in the form of financial settlements. All in all, not a great day for anyone. I honestly can't tell you how I feel about the way the aftermath was handled. So, with that story being told, I let the events stand for themselves and allow you all to draw your own conclusions about that. This was a rough one, folks, and thanks for sticking through it. I've been a bartender for a very long time. Before I owned my own bar, I worked at various smaller ones while I went through more training and getting the necessary licenses needed to open my own. One of the places I worked at included this tiny music venue that held maybe 150 people max, with a stage that was basically just a raised platform in the back corner. The bar ran along one wall, and from my position I could pretty much see everything that happened in the place. That one was probably one of my favorites, because there was always some kind of event happening. I got paid to listen to some great music while mixing drinks and meeting many people. But then I've also been trapped there when the bands were pretty terrible, and would have clenched my teeth as I listened to off-key vocals and guitars that needed better tuning. But the customers typically kept me busy between making their drinks and corralling those who'd had too much to drink. Most nights were pretty standard. Local bands, regular crowd, typical bar drama. But there was one night that I would never forget. It was some kind of discount fall concert. There was a large one happening the week prior with some bigger and popular bands, and the venue I worked at was wanting to do something similar, but smaller, for those of us that couldn't dish out that kind of money, but still wanted to party. They got 2 local bands and a popular cover band, so they did decently with the lineup, too. The concert started out pretty normal, people getting drinks as they came in. I noticed this guy pretty quickly that was on a mission to get wasted and hit on every woman in the place. I was familiar with the type, probably mid-30s, wearing a shirt that was too tight, sunglasses indoors, and a backwards cap. He was buying drinks for himself, and then offering to buy drinks for literally any woman who approached the bar. Like I said, I've seen his type before. The guy that thinks if he buys enough drinks, someone will be impressed by his generosity. What actually happens, more often than not, is he spends $200+ getting rejected all night while I collect his money and try not to laugh. This dude was particularly persistent, though. Every single woman who came to the bar got the same offer from him. A pretty smile, some kind of pickup line, and motions for me to get them another drink. The success rate was about what you'd expect. 0. But hey, his money was good. He was paying for everything up front, no tabs, so I kept serving him. My boss, the owner, had a pretty clear policy about when we could cut people off. Either at closing time, or if they were clearly too drunk to function. Stumbling around, causing problems, that kind of stuff. As long as someone could walk and wasn't being aggressive, the drinks could keep going. He also wasn't being aggressive to the women that he approached. If they said no or walked away, he let them go, not even trying to stop them. So, I guess he had some dignity. If he had done any of that, I would have been inclined to kick him out. I was the youngest kid with 3 sisters, a wife, and a young daughter, and I was raised to be pretty protective. This guy made it through the first band just fine. A little buzzed, but was handling himself okay. By the second band, he was definitely feeling it more, getting louder and more animated with his pickup attempts. The rejections were piling up, but he seemed to be taking them in stride, just moving on to the next woman with the same tired lines. Then came the break between the second and third bands. And that's when things started to pick up a bit. He came up to the bar and started making these weird requests. He wanted some kind of shot that you basically served on fire. I looked at him like he was crazy. I remember telling him, "Bro, this is a dive bar in a basement. We've got beer, shots, and basic mixed drinks. We don't deal with fire here." But he was just as persistent with me. He was begging me to just light one on fire for me, please, just one. The girls will love it. I'll tip big. I stayed polite but firm and told him that it wasn't going to happen. We didn't have a setup for that kind of thing, and it wasn't safe. Finally, he gave up, ordered another beer, and wandered back toward the crowd. Not even 10 minutes later, he came back, empty-handed, asking for one more shot. Either he'd left his beer somewhere, or he had chugged it that fast. Either way, he was drinking too much. I didn't want to, but I knew I was going to have to cut him off. I gave him one more, hoping the band would start soon and distract him, but I told him that it was his last for the night. He nodded, telling me he understood, and slid to the end of the bar where 2 women had been sitting and talking. That's when things went downhill. He held up the shot, showing the woman, and I heard him say, "Hey, check this out." I was just beginning to help someone else when I heard him say it, so I turned to check. He had pulled out a lighter and was holding it toward the glass. I yelled at him to stop, already walking toward him, and he noticed. It was too late, though. He had lit the glass on fire, and clearly, having never done that before, he went to pour it in his mouth. And then he completely missed. In case you haven't before, there's a technique to drinking those. Immediately trying to toss it back is not the way to do it. This guy, however, was too intoxicated for anything that required technique. I wasn't fast enough, and as he poured it, missing his mouth, the whiskey and flames went across the lower half of his face and chest. The screaming was immediate and terrifying. It was the kind of screams you hear in movies and shows. This was raw, primal terror and pain coming straight from this man. He started running around the bar area, batting at his face and chest, which only made it worse, spreading the flames around, as you could imagine. You'd think someone would remember the old stop, drop, and roll from elementary school, but not quite when you're drunk and panicking. This guy was just running in circles, and I was trying to find the best way to jump in and put him out. The crowd really wasn't much help either. Most of them were just trying to stay away from him, while a handful of people holding water bottles shook it out towards him, not doing much but making the floor wet. Finally, I was able to find a good opening, and as he ran past me, I tackled him to the ground, patting him with my damp towel that I had. Once he was down, a few others jumped in, dousing him with water too and asking what they should do. I told one of them to call 911, and I tried to get the guy's attention. He was groaning, in a lot of pain, but he was giving some answers and very short ones. I wasn't a doctor or anything of the sorts, but the main thing I could think to ask him was if he could breathe, and he responded yes. So, we were making progress, I guess. But the damage had already been done. A couple of times over, too. His face was red and blistered. His shirt was mostly burned away. Whatever it was made of burned really fast. His hair was also singed along his face. The smell was god-awful. The burning flesh and hair, not to mention body odors and beer all around. I wanted to gag and felt bad, but it was bad. It wouldn't have been so bad, but his eyes were wide open. His face was red and blistered, so I know that he saw me do it too, but after all of that, even with the amount of pain and fear that he was in, he reached his arm out, grabbed my arm, and said, "Hey, thank you." Finally, the paramedics arrived, and they immediately went to work on him. They loaded him up and whisked him away. Clearly, there were some problems with us continuing the show, so we sadly had to cut it, but the third band was pretty cool and apparently played a little acoustic set out in the parking lot, while the rest of us cleaned the place up, checking for any residual fire hazards. That was probably one of the craziest things I'd witnessed during my time bartending there. The smell stuck with me, and the terrified look in his eyes really stuck with me. I had another crazy story from a different bar I worked at where two guys got into a fight, pulled out knives, and it became a literal bloody mess. And to add to the craziness of that whole situation, the two guys were friends. But maybe if I have time, I'll write that one up for you as well. Moral of the story? If you're going to drink, just leave the fire out of it, please. In August of 1969, the music festival Woodstock went off wonderfully. It went so well, in fact, that the Grateful Dead decided to do a concert on the West Coast that would be free for all to attend. This all sounds wonderful. One of the most popular bands of the 60s with a star-studded cast of people slated to perform, including Santana, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and the Rolling Stones. With all these stars and with tremendous fanfare, the show was well on its way to being organized and ready to kick off on December 6th of 1969. However, what was meant to be a celebration of that free love spirit of the time would turn into something that is still remembered. Just not for the reasons people would have liked for it to have been remembered. The plan was to host the concert at Altamont Speedway in Livermore, California, and there were little worries about the venue or being able to accommodate what was expected to be an absolutely humongous crowd. The one pressing issue, though, that had not been addressed was security. The Grateful Dead and the group Jefferson Airplane suggested to the Rolling Stones management that they should book the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club for security for the gig, as they had used them in the past and had no incidents. And thus, the Hells Angels were booked as security for $500 worth of beer. But this would be quite a fateful decision. But then again, I have a lot of hindsight here to say something like that. There is a lot of dispute over just what role the Hells Angels were meant to play at that concert. Sonny Barger himself has said that there was no agreement for them to be security of any kind, that he and his, quote, boys were invited to drink beer and enjoy the show until it was over. Other accounts say that they were just meant to keep people from rushing the stage. Others claim they don't even know why the Angels were there to begin with. The show began with Santana performing, a set that was fairly uneventful. However, as the day dragged on, more people were getting high and drunk and inevitably getting more restless as they enjoyed their respective buzzes. The Angels and the crowd were getting more irritable, and violence was beginning to break out, as stoned hippies began trying to climb onto the stage and the Angels were beating people up and throwing them off the stage back into the crowd. Things began to escalate as the Angels began to arm themselves with sawn-off pool cues and bike chains. When someone from the crowd knocked over one of the Angels' bikes, things really started to get heated. The Angels got even rougher with the crowd, and even started to get more aggressive with the performers. Marty Balin of the group Jefferson Airplane jumped off of the stage during their set to try to sort out whatever the issue was, only to be knocked unconscious by one of the Hells Angels. Paul Cantor, the guitarist for the group, sarcastically thanked the Angels for knocking out their singer, which provoked Angel Bill Freach, who grabbed one of the microphones and began to yell and argue with the musician about the incident. The Grateful Dead, the primary organizer of the event, were supposed to be playing in between the Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young and the Rolling Stones. But once they heard about the situation with Balin, they refused to play a set and left the venue. When Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young took the stage, things did nothing but further deteriorate when Stephen Stills was stabbed in the leg by a Hells Angels with a sharpened bicycle spoke. By the time the Rolling Stones came out to play, it was utter chaos. The Angels were fighting the crowd was fighting amongst themselves. It was just an incredibly violent ordeal at this point, and just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it of course does. A member of the crowd, a young man named Meredith Hunter, aged 18, had attempted to climb onto the stage with other concert-goers, only to be punched by an angel and tossed back into the crowd. Meredith was reportedly so high he could barely stand, but he was angry, and out of his mind on drugs, and he came to the front of the crowd, right at the foot of the stage, and drew a gun. Reportedly, he was pointing it at Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones. And that's when Hells Angels' Paul Pissarro leapt into action, allegedly pulling a knife from, some say his belt, others say his boot. The knife was tucked into his sock. Once armed, he rushed Hunter and knocked the pistol away with his left hand, and then stabbed Hunter twice in the head with his right hand, killing the young man. In the documentary, Gimme Shelter, it is revealed that Eric Sarin was on the stage recording and taking pictures of the crowd. Sarin was unaware at first that he had caught the killing on film until a week later, when the raw footage was screened. The entire sequence is roughly 2 seconds long, and you can see the crowd part and then Hunter appears front and center in his bright green suit, with the silhouette of a revolver clearly in his hand, visible against the light-colored vest of the person next to him. Pissarro comes in from the right and parries the gun and then stabs Hunter twice, then pulls him off screen. Later on, it's reported he stabbed Hunter 5 times in the upper back, and once he was on the ground, several other angels began to stomp on and kick him. The autopsy did confirm that Hunter was high on amphetamines at the time of his death. In 1971, Pissarro was charged with murder and taken to trial. After watching the footage shot at the concert, it was ruled self-defense and Pissarro was found not guilty, acquitted of all charges. This was not the only violence that occurred over the course of the day and into the evening. All told, there was the killing of Meredith Hunter, 3 additional accidental deaths, numerous assaults occurred between members of the crowd that began turning on itself at a certain point. Multiple cars were stolen and abandoned, and there was also massive property damage that occurred during the chaos. All told, the concert that was meant to spread the love carried over from Woodstock instead became a violent riot that saw multiple people lose their lives, and so many more injured. I guess the only question that remains is, was this concert always doomed to be a tragedy, albeit of a different kind? Or was it the presence of the most notorious biker club in the world that set things on the disastrous course they ultimately went on? That, we will never have a true answer to. But we are all, of course, allowed to speculate on it. So that, my friends, was a collection of some scary concert, I think is what the thumbnail says, concert and music venue stories. They were all concert adjacent, but the guy setting himself on fire one's more of just a music venue because the concert wasn't an important part of it. But in my opinion, they're all scary concert stories, and hopefully you enjoyed them. Do I have any anecdotes for this one? No. We've been to some pretty decent concerts. Haven't been to... You know what? I was going to say I haven't been to one in a while, but actually that's a lie. We went to one last month in August. We saw Hoobastank at the park here in town. It was a free concert, and it was outdoors, and it was actually really good. The band that opened for them, whom I cannot remember the name were decent. And then, of course, Hoobastank actually puts on a really good show. Dude's really energetic. And then I looked up how old he was, and I felt old because... Yeah. Anyways, concerts are fun. I've never had a bad one. We've had a concert we went to where the band sucked that we went to see, which is really unfortunate because we paid a lot for those tickets. And then we've never had like a bad experience though. Besides that, every other concert we've been to has been decent. So yeah. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed the stories. If you did, please hit that like button. New to the channel and like what you heard, consider hitting that subscribe button. You can also leave me a comment with which story you thought was the scariest or most interesting, or which one you liked the most. Or if you have a story, you can go to astheravendreams.com, send it my way, or go to your email and email it to astheravendreams@gmail.com. On that website, astheravendreams.com, you can also find where you can listen to the podcast and other platforms. You can also find me on my social media platforms on that website, and just other stuff. It's a pretty all-encompassing website. You can join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this and other things. I have a lot of early access content up for my members and patrons right now, so yeah. All said, friends, hope you have a wonderful week. Hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Don't forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Till next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.